Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Dairy Tuesday webinar series. We are pleased to have Rob Eyrich join us this morning to talk about the veterinary feed directives in animal stewardship. Rob is an extension educator and director of beef quality assurance. He is an advocate for agriculture with a strong passion for the Nebraska ag community and is committed to building consumer confidence in the food system through production, processing, distribution, consumption, and waste management. Rob has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Wyoming and a Master of Science from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Most of his experience has been working in the quality assurance education from youth to adults in the cattle industry. So good morning, Rob, and I will turn it over to you from here.
Well, thanks, Kim. Glad to be here. We will kind of go over some things today on some animal health stewardship and then really kind of what we are looking at with the veterinary feed directive and make sure that everybody understands. If they have questions after following the webinar, they're always welcome to contact me, and my contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. So let's go ahead and get started here today. When we start looking at the veterinary feed directive, it's probably the thing that everybody's hearing the most about currently within the industry, but not only the dairy industry and the beef industry, but in the livestock industry as a whole. So I think we need to really define stewardship, judicious use, and then talk about some relationships that we have with our veterinarian, and then move right into the plans and the veterinary feed directive itself. Why was the veterinary feed directive really started or put the regulation put into place? And it all kind of falls back on what our general perceptions are as our public and our consumers are looking at what we're doing within the beef industry and dairy industry, but also what their food looks like in production. And so they start to hear things when we start talking about antibiotic use. They hear about antibiotic resistance, that general superbug that everybody is concerned with, even though we haven't found that link with antibiotics that we are using within the livestock industry to any resistance. And we actually have seen that actual antibiotic resistance happens in some natural occurring organisms as well. So those things are about evolution and how those organisms are developing change over time. Then we always hear about, well, it's going to affect us in the human health because we'll lose some antibiotic use from that resistance. But then we look at how much product we use in the livestock industry, and they feel that we're overusing these antibiotics because they have some general importance, and actually some of them very critical importance to human medicine. And then we look at labels, and we start to see things that antibiotic use is there for performance. And I think we really all use it judiciously, and we want to use these antibiotics to the point where we use them when they're needed, but we also know that healthy animals will perform better as well within our industry. But the general perception from our public thinks that that is the only reason we use some of these products. And then, of course, we hear about, well, the promotion is antibiotics are found in the human food supply, which all food supply has to be tested. And so we know that within our industry that is not fact, and we actually know that we follow those withdrawal times, and we don't let those residues get out into human consumption. But then we have to really look at the bottom line. There's 2% of the population in the U.S. that is involved in production agriculture, and 98% of the consumers have been removed from agriculture for 2 or more generations. So they have a different perception of what we do, and so we need to follow through and probably be more transparent, and we have to be a part of the educational piece for our consumers, letting them know where food production and where it happens and how it happens within our industries. Now, just to kind of follow up on that, here's a chart that was developed by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and when you look at it, this is total antibiotic use in livestock industry. And so when you look at what we use, the products that we use that are important medically to human medicine are listed down the left-hand side of the column, and then we look at what percent of those are used within the total livestock usage. And I think when you start to look at it, we start to go down that chart a little bit as you kind of see my arrow pointing. I think you look at these and you look at what percentage. I think there is one target that we see pretty quickly is the tetracyclines make up 71% of antibiotic use in livestock. And so that becomes kind of a target when we start thinking about our general public seeing a table like this and starting to interpret those numbers. But then the other big thing is as we move across that column or that line in that chart, we also see between 09 and 13, we've actually had a 24% increase in that product alone. And so when we start looking at tetracyclines, that becomes a big target because there is value to tetracyclines in human medicine, and we see that being used on some different type of treatments within human medicine. But those are a big target, even though we can go right above the line above them. In that same time frame, sulfas have decreased 24%. But we go back over, they only make up 4% of the usage within the livestock industry. And so this is kind of, when we start looking at this, how you interpret this table. If you're in production agriculture, you see, well, what has happened between 09 and 13 here in this column, but general public doesn't take in consideration numbers of animals that are within all of our livestock industry. We also don't take in consideration treatment is based on weight. And so these are just total tonnages of products used. And so how we interpret that is totally different between different industries and from producers to consumers. But this is what they're looking at when they start to look at making regulations. The next slide here shows two different things, and one of the things that it shows is what type of residues in '08 that might have been found in cull or market dairy cows, and then veal calves, both of those columns. And so we see that even though we've increasingly gotten better with residues within our products and those type of things, we still have some things that pop up in a given year. And so we have to be aware of those, and we need to keep working on that. But this is a chart that, again, when we see our general public take a hold of this, they start to see numbers like 269, and they look at all of these different products and they think, wow, there's some residues out there we need to be concerned with, even though these don't ever get into human consumption because they are tested, and so those will be actually disposed of outside of that plan as well. And so we have to be aware of those things and think about how the general public sees these type of charts. So with that as a background, I think we have to look at how do we move forward. And I think when we start to put this together, antibiotic stewardship, and I also call it animal health stewardship, plays an important role in what we do. And I think what we see here in the red is probably what we really need to target is we want to select for the optimal antimicrobial drug regimen, dosage, duration of therapy, and route of administration. And we want to limit the selection of antimicrobial resistant type of strains. And so when we put that in a whole, that really comes together with what we see in the dairy quality assurance program as well as the beef quality assurance programs across the nation. We've really been talking about this since the early 80s, and so we need to really follow what we are saying we're doing, but we need to be transparent and make sure we are following the dosage and the recommendations that are out there, not only in treatment, but also in preventative health in all of our livestock industries. And so that definition is kind of what we need to continually move forward with. The other piece that we talk about a lot within the livestock industry is judicious use of antimicrobials. And veterinary medicine comes out with this approach to maximize therapeutic efficacy and minimize selection of resistant antimicrobials or microorganisms. And so when we think about that, are we using these products correctly? Are we treating things correctly? And some guidelines that Dr. Jeff Fox from around the West Point area mentioned in a conference at the Nebraska Cattlemen in 2015 is basically 4 words that we need to think about when we talk about judicious use. 1, timely. Are we diagnosing things early enough and making a plan to treat that early enough on in that treatment program? Is it truly needed? Are we using products for animals that are sick, that are showing the signs of some type of a disease or illness? And so we have to make sure we need the product. But then we want to make sure, is what we're using to treat that product effective? Is it labeled to treat that diagnosis? And the last thing is following the label for dosage, administration, and the indices that we have on that label. Not using off-label or extra-label type of usage unless prescribed by a veterinarian when we start talking about injectables. And so those things, I think we need to put those 4 words into play as we think about judicious use and making sure we're using things properly. Probably one of the main things that we are going to see within the veterinary fee directive is truly building a very strong veterinary client-patient relationship. This relationship needs to be a working relationship that we have with that veterinarian, almost a partnership within our operation. That way they understand what's going on within that operation and they can help us develop some herd health plans, from preventative measures to treatments, maybe even some alternatives that we might not have thought about in treating some of these diagnoses. They are going to be our key player in helping us do the diagnosis because they have the main oversight and follow-up responsibilities in this relationship. They will help us create regimens for that treatment and make sure that we get things treated properly. They also have to be within a reasonable distance to do oversight and follow-up on all these operations, which with they have this working relationship. So if anything, as we move into the veterinary fee directive, this is going to be the key element in preparation with this. As we move into this scenario of working with the VFDs, we have to have that veterinarian on board early on. So between now and January of 2017, we need to sit down with that veterinarian and make sure we create these plans and protocols ahead of time. That way we are more prepared as we move forward with the VFDs. So within developing that stewardship plan for treatment, you need to work and consult that veterinarian and create a core vaccination protocol. And that vaccination protocol is pretty common across the board with a lot of operations, and I have a few of the core vaccines on there for the cattle industry that you might think about and have that discussion with that veterinarian. But know that you need to be utilizing veterinarians that have familiarity with your area or region as well. Because some of the things that we might encounter in western Nebraska, central Nebraska, and eastern Nebraska aren't always the same pathogens and parasites that we would in other locations. And so we have to continually think about that. And the person that's usually the most up on what's going on within that region is those veterinarians that consult and are heavily involved in those regions or the region that we are located in. We also need to think about some additional considerations as far as pesticide control and those type of things, but that's all in the discussion that you have with that veterinarian. But when we start talking about the veterinary feed directives and antimicrobials, those antibiotics, that usage has to start coming down under treatment protocols. Now, injectable antibiotics, those will remain the same even with the veterinary feed directive. We will still be able to purchase and utilize injectable antibiotics as we have in the past, and we will continually work with those folks and making sure that we still use those judiciously. But what's going to happen is any feed grade antibiotics that we have listed, that are listed by FDA as feed grade antibiotics, those will all start to require a veterinary feed directive, which is a written order from a veterinarian to use. So when we start looking at those treatment protocols, we need to have those written down because there might be some diagnosis that maybe something has been used in the past for a feed-grade antibiotic that might not be available because it's not labeled as a diagnosis with that product. So some of the things that might be out there are you might need to look at alternative methods, maybe some probiotics or a change in a mineral program that will help prevent some of these type of diseases and use them more as a preventative, possibly a treatment versus some of those things that you might have done or utilized in the past. But remember, feed-grade antibiotics is what's going to be affected by the veterinary feed directive. Here's a tool as you start to look at those treatment protocols and actually preventative protocols that might be available for you and that I would encourage you to maybe utilize. It's a smartphone app. It can also be downloaded with your computer online. And it's the Compendium of Veterinary Products. Basically, you can put in what you're looking for to treat. It can sort numerous ways. What I did is I actually did some shots here, some screenshots of, I put in bovine respiratory disease, and then it gives me all of the products, as you kind of see the second screenshot here, all of the products that are available that are listed for treating the bovine respiratory disease. As you look down that list, I just selected Resfor, and I clicked on that, and what it gives you the label, and then you can actually go over the next one and click on use and dosage, and it'll give you what it can be used for, how to administer it, the dosage, and then also withdrawal time. So it's basically a resource that's available for you within the industry to utilize to help maybe look at some of these protocols and so forth. So let's really get into the veterinary feed directive. The veterinary feed directive is a written order by a licensed veterinarian in the course of their practice approving the use of a veterinary feed directive product, which is basically those antibiotics, feed grade products that we have out there. Now, a legal written order. We don't call this a prescription because as we look at prescriptions, they fall under the regulation of the Department of Pharmaceuticals and Pharmacies within each state. With a veterinary feed directive as a written order, it will be regulated within the realm of USDA, and right now it's probably going to remain within the State Department of Ag program with the feed inspectors now. That's kind of where it's looking at where that regulation will kind of fall. But what is truly a legal written order is where I think we need some clarification. On this written order, the veterinarian will identify the diagnosis, what the treatment protocol is, how many head that you might be treating, at what dosage for a given period of time. And so with that, it will tell them, the producer, what he can use that product for within that given amount of time on the number of livestock that they'll be treating. Now, that is, some products, newer products, are very specific. The newest product that I have as an example would be Pulmotil, mainly used in the beef industry as far as its Mycotil in the feed grade. And so what that does is that product can only have a written veterinary feed directive that is good for 45 days. But it's very specific on number of head, dosage, and amount of product that can be purchased from the feed store underneath that veterinary feed directive. Now, things that will be becoming more and more challenging with that written order is the veterinarian has to have a legal signature on it. So what happens is if you happen to stop in to the vet clinic, if the veterinarian's out on call, nobody within that clinic can sign that with the approval of the veterinarian, and it has to be the veterinarian's legal signature. So there's going to be some challenges, and being prepared ahead of time is probably the key element when I start talking about that relationship that you have with your veterinary. Be prepared ahead of time, because some of these veterinary feed directives can be written for as long as a 6-month period, depending on how it's written on the feed label itself. And so that gets a little confusing because some will be shorter than others, but it's all related back to how the label for the product was approved through FDA and USDA. Now, let's look at the timeline that this has evolved and continually is evolving. In June of 2015, what FDA said is all of the manufacturers of the feed-grade antibiotics had to submit new labels, taking off anything on that label that has anything to do with performance, like feed efficiencies, average daily gain, milk production. All of those need to come off the label. So the only thing that will be on the label will be these products can be used to prevent, treat, or control a given diagnosis. And we can only use those products for that diagnosis. So now in 2016, these new labels are going to start to appear and be available within all the livestock industry, and they're getting approved within this year of 2016. Now what happens on January 1st of 2017 is all feed-grade antibiotics will require a VFD to be purchased and used by a producer. Now, the veterinarian will have an original copy, the producer will have a copy, and the feed manufacturer or distributor or dealer will have to have a copy before you can take possession of the product and utilize that product. And so that's all going to start in January 1st of 2017. Again, I remind you, this is for feed-grade antibiotics. All injectable antibiotics will remain the same as they have been to purchase and get those. The other thing that happens in 2017 is if we deliver any of these antibiotics feed grade through the water supply of an operation, now that requires a prescription versus a veterinary feed directive order. And so that has changed, and that's going to change come 2017. So we need to be prepared as we kind of think about how we are using these products and moving forward with this veterinary feed directive. So I mentioned earlier, these products can only be used for the prevention, treatment, or control of a disease. So let's define that. And this is actually going to be written on those labels as well. If we're looking at prevention of a disease, this would be a veterinarian can write you an order for this product if there is a known risk present and you will be using a product, a veterinary feed directive type of product, that feed grade antibiotic to treat these animals in a preventative known risk disease. Okay. So if you know something's happening, an example would be we are weaning calves off, we're concerned, and there's a known risk of bovine respiratory disease, that veterinarian can write us a veterinary feed directive potentially for CTC to prevent bovine respiratory disease in those calves. So that would be the prevention of that disease with a known risk. A treatment is we have exhibiting the signs of that disease, and we are treating for that disease with that product. That's straightforward, pretty simple. Now, control of a disease, this gets a little bit more challenging because or an animal in one pen, now you're worried about that spreading to other multiples within your operation, animals or pens. Then that would be the control of a disease. You can start those other animals on that product to help control it from spreading throughout the rest of the operation. So those three are how they determine how this can be written by a veterinarian. With that oversight, it can be for prevention, treatment, or control of that disease. Again, the labeled disease that is on that product. This chart gets a little busy, but what it kind of explains is those products, those active ingredients, antibiotics, that are critically important to human medicine, highly important, and those antibiotics that are not important to human medicine that we have and use in the livestock industry. As you go across that chart to the right, it talks about kind of some scenarios. When you start thinking about products that are used less than in a 7-day window of treatment, those products have a lower risk of creating any type of bacteria or resistance to antibiotics that are out there. We know the greater amount of time that we use those products, we have a higher risk of things becoming, organisms becoming resistance to antibiotics and antimicrobials. And so we want to look at duration of the treatment to make sure that we are treating things properly within what is listed on those labels. So again, another reminder, the veterinary feed directive will only be related to those antimicrobials or antibiotics that are in the feed grade. So injectables, again, stay the same. It's not going to affect things like ionophores, parasite control, those type of things. It's not going to affect any of those products. And then water delivery of antimicrobials and antibiotics will require a prescription again. The next two slides will kind of give us a better idea of active ingredients and some of the things that we're probably going to see concerned within the cattle industry. So when we start thinking about common products that we see in the cattle industry, basically our chlorotetracycline, CTC, the chlorotetracyclines with some sulfa, methazine or sulfa products, some neomycin and oxytetracycline, tiacin, and virginiamycin. Those are the common products, active ingredients that we see used within our industry. And I got actually some brands that you might be more familiar with, Ariomycin, Terramycin, Tylan, and VMAX. Those products are going to be the main products within the beef cattle industry that we will see requiring the veterinary feed directive. Now, these products, again, you're going to have to use them by what's on the label. And so I'll give an example of CTC. When you look at Ariomycin label, it is for the diagnosis of bovine respiratory disease and angioplasmosis. There's nothing else on that label for diagnosis. And I know that within a lot of our cattle industry, we've used that product maybe for some treatment of some hoof rot, those type of things. And so that's no longer available in that type of product. And so when we think about that, it can only be used for those two diagnosis. So what are some alternatives that we might have out there that might be available to us to prevent or treat some of those diagnoses? And that all relates back to that conversation that you have with your veterinarian to look at what risk you have and what type of protocols you have to treat those. Again, these products are the main products and active ingredients. So anytime we see these active ingredients in a feed, that feed is going to require a veterinary feed directive. That includes milk replacer. It includes minerals with these products. It includes any type of pellet with these products, or if you're just top dressing these specific products or running them through some type of a feed micro machine, there's got to be a veterinary feed directive for these active ingredients. Now, this next slide shows those things that aren't going to require a veterinary feed directive. And so when you look down through there, a lot of these are parasite control, some coccidiosis control or prevention or treatment. We see ionophores on this list like Bovatec, Remixin, some bloat guard, Raybon for some treatment of pesticide treatments. And so when you start looking at this list, these are the lists that aren't going to require a VFD unless they are in conjunction with any of those active ingredients on the previous slide. So if you have a pellet that's made with one of these products, but also with areomycin, that product now requires a VFD, and that veterinary feed directive is for the treatment, prevention, or control of a diagnosis, but it can only be fed within the context of what's on the label that you're treating. So again, the diagnosis is still going to be the key. Most of these products here, standalone products, will not require a VFD in the future. And so that's kind of where we're at. And I know it gets confusing when we start getting to this point, but I think we really need to continually think about the active ingredient side of what we are using within our industry. And that's where the veterinary feed directive, it's that oversight to help us be more transparent in what we're doing within all the livestock industry. So kind of the take-home message as we kind of wrap some of these things up is, one, producers need to have a strong, valid working relationship in the context of a veterinary client-patient relationship with a veterinarian that's willing to take the responsibility for oversight and the responsibility to work with you in creating herd health plans, from vaccinations and preventative protocols, treatments, and possibly looking at alternative treatments that might be available to us outside of utilizing a lot of antibiotics within the feed grade. Make sure we diagnose things properly, and that's what we're treating for, using the appropriate products, follow the plans that we have created. And when you get that valid veterinary feed directive, make sure it's a valid directive signed by your licensed veterinarian within your state that you are operating, and making sure that it is written for the right diagnosis, and making sure that you are getting the product utilized and fed properly. There is no extra label use on feed grade antibiotics. They can't be fed by anything except by what's directed on the label in with and on the veterinary feed directive as well. Again, that has always been the case of no extra label, off-label use of feed grade antibiotics. It's against federal regulation. So feeding them properly is the key. The other thing that we fall into is we create these veterinary feed directives is reminding everybody involved, you must maintain and keep those records of the veterinary feed directive for a minimum of 2 years. So the veterinary keeps the original. The producer gets a copy, and the feed distributor, manufacturer, or feed store, however you're getting that product, they have to maintain a copy of that veterinary feed directive for 2 years as well. So the record-keeping piece, again, it's the paperwork and the transparency within our industry, but we have to maintain that paperwork for that 2-year period. There are some resources available to you. I use my website. I know Nebraska now has the dairy website with Kim Clark, and but these are some other places where we have some veterinary feed directive information. Nebraska Beef Quality Assurance, which is bqa.unl.edu. We have some veterinary feed directive at our national website, bqa.org. And then the other resource that I had available for you is the Compendium of Veterinary Products, which is available through Bayer Animal Health, and you can actually find that online. And you can go back to the earlier slide. I actually do have that contact information or that website on there as well. So again, the veterinary feed directive, it's nothing that's probably new within the total industry, but it's something new to us within the cattle industry because we haven't seen products that required a VFD until now. Those products now, all of them require a VFD. Some of the newer antibiotics that have been out there within the livestock industry as a whole have required a VFD for the since they've actually came online, like Pullman's Hill in the beef cattle industry. So again, a lot of information on VFDs, but I think it's not something that we need to be aware of, and we need to follow the regulation. But it's not something that we are going to lose products that are out there in our toolbox. We have to use them properly. I think optimism says that we might have some opportunity for some of these manufacturers to actually get new approvals of products that they might have been working on for other diagnoses that are available for us out there in the industry. So optimism says we have some opportunity to maybe see some new products in the future that we haven't seen up to this point. So with that, I can open it up if there's some specific questions. But the other thing that I told you I would give you is my contact information. And feel free to email me or make a phone call, and we can have further discussion on the veterinary feed directive as well. And I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks, Rob. There are a couple of questions that I jotted down as you were presenting today.
Okay.
And my first question is, you really stress the importance of working with your veterinarian and making sure there are vaccination protocols. If a producer or farmer does not have vaccination protocols, is there a template they can find somewhere to start a protocol?
I do have some basic templates that are available on my website at bqa.unl.edu. But the biggest thing on creating those protocols is not necessarily a specific template, but go down and just get them written down on paper somehow. And there's some actually, depending on how they manage a lot of their system within the operation, there are some, if you're using a computer program to manage feeds and animal health issues, usually you can create those just within that system. But the other thing is let's just, as an example, if we have a treatment protocol for our cows, just write it down, type it on a piece of paper. This is for mature cows. This is the vaccination program we use. For replacements, this is their first protocol for their vaccination program prior to moving into the cow herd. With the veal calves and those type of things, same thing. As long as you have that written down somewhere. And then what I would say as far as a template for treatments, think about the different diagnoses you have within your operation, write those down, and then work with that veterinarian to determine what is your primary treatment for each one of those. And if that primary treatment doesn't resolve the issue, is there a secondary treatment that you will try the second time? And so that's kind of what I talk about when making those protocols, is simply get something written down on paper of what those are.
Great, thank you. My next question, again, is related to the vet relationship. There may be some producers who don't have that strong relationship with their vet. Maybe their vet just comes out a couple times a year, 3 times a year, whatever it may be. How would you recommend a farmer go about building that relationship with their veterinarian?
Even within only, having that visit twice or 3 times a year, that is still probably as strong as any relationship that you might have with a veterinarian. I think what you need to do within those visits with that veterinarian on the operation is you probably need to plan some time just to sit down and discuss maybe some issues that you are aware of, or maybe some things that you think are going to be a risk in the animal health side of your operation. And at least that way that producer and that veterinarian know each other, but also that way that veterinarian has a better idea of the operation as a whole. And it's kind of, I guess it's not truly a partnership, but they are a partner when it comes to creating a healthy herd. And so I think if you have that discussion when they are there, that's when they will trust your diagnosis and work with you on those diagnoses as you need these products. And if they are there, it might be, if they're there in February of every year, that might be the time that you sit down and review your vaccination protocols and review kind of some of your main treatments that you use, if those are still viable, or maybe there might be a new product that came on the market that is a little bit more economical, or that is more effective on those diagnoses. So even the relationship, as long as you have a working relationship where they understand what's going on, the thing that some of them, and most of them, are becoming more formal, and I know in the Dairy Beef Quality Assurance Manual that is on my website, there is a template of a veterinary client-patient relationship where the veterinary signs and the producer signs that they have a working relationship, that they understand what's going on in that operation. So that's what we're looking for when we talk about that relationship, is they have to understand before they will help you diagnose those things and do these written feed directives, or even prescriptions for that matter.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks again, Kim, for having me. And again, if there's any other questions, please feel free to contact me anytime.